Good morning. I deal first with the application on behalf of the families of Ch Boal. In her oral application, Ms. Mitchell identified 10 issues. I shall allow some of these to be explored. Issue number 1 relates to race as a factor in the decision made by Mr. McEwan to call a critical incident. Ms. Mitchell identified 4 specific matters under this heading. I shall allow her to explore the second of these, which I shall call 1B, namely, whether or not, had a white man died in custody, would Mr. McEwan have been concerned about looting, widespread disorder and criminality. Issue 4 relates to the attendance of Mr. McEwan at the family home of Caddy and Addie Johnson on the 3rd of May 2015, and I shall allow that issue to be explored. Issue 5 relates to the request by the family for the post-mortem examination to be postponed pending the arrival of Mrs. Boal, and I shall allow exploration of this issue. In relation to the other matters raised by Ms. Mitchell, I consider that in some instances it would be more appropriate to explore the issues in submissions, and in others that I would not be assisted by exploration of the issue with this witness. Turning to the application on behalf of the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner, PIRC, in the light of the evidence given by Mr. McEwan in relation to the issue of family liaison officers, I shall allow Mr. Scullion to explore the matters set out in the application. For administrative reasons, it is convenient to take the examination by Mr. Scullion first. So, Mr. Scullion, if you would come to the table and we could have the witness back, please. Good morning, Mr. McEwan. You're going to be asked questions by Mr. Scullion, KC, who represents the PIRC. Mr. Scullion.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. McEwan, on Tuesday you gave evidence regarding issues which arose during 3rd May 2015 in relation to the deployment of family liaison officers. And I wonder if you could assist the Chair with further information in relation to that aspect of your evidence.
I'll certainly try.
In 2015, where there was a death in police custody, which would be investigated by the PIRC, did responsibility for delivery of the death message remain with Police Scotland?
The responsibility of delivery was initiated for Police Scotland to do it, but the oversight of the investigation was with PIRC.
All right. And that aspect of it remaining with Police Scotland, was that to avoid delay?
I'm not sure. It was a direction from PIRC. I'm not sure the reason behind it.
On Tuesday, during your evidence, you said that you would have expected family liaison officers to be deployed within 2 hours. And did you mean 2 hours from the time of death or 2 hours from some other point in the investigation?
I said, I think at the time, but certainly my intention was 2 hours from time of death, so from the back of 9 o'clock.
So sometime
Where
shortly
possible.
after 11 o'clock. On 3rd May of 2015, the first Gold Group meeting was at 11:30. And by that time, were you aware of ongoing discussions regarding the investigation between Deputy Senior Investigator Keith Harrower and Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell?
Was I aware of the...
The discussions were
Yes, of
ongoing by
course.
that stage.
Yes.
And were you aware that they had specific discussions regarding the deployment of family liaison officers?
I was aware there were discussions ongoing. I assume there will have been a number of discussions out with my hearing, because I was privy only to the gold discussions around that.
During the inquiry on day 47, Detective Superintendent Campbell gave evidence that one of the earliest priorities was the identification of family liaison officers. Is that what you would have expected to happen?
Yes.
And he also gave evidence that family liaison officers would be deployed initially by Police Scotland, and there would later be a handover to PIRC. Is that something you were aware of on the morning of 3rd May?
Again, my sort of awareness of it all was that from, back at 10 on the Sunday morning, PIRC had oversight and ownership of the investigation, and they would direct Police Scotland. So one of the directions was around the early deployment of flows.
So were you aware from the morning that Police Scotland were going to initially deploy flows?
The intention was, yes.
All right. And during your evidence, generally, you spoke about the importance of the family to you in the context of the investigation.
Absolutely.
At the first Gold Group meeting, did you ask Detective Superintendent Campbell to confirm what the plan was in relation to family liaison officers?
Not that I recall, no.
I wonder if you could look at a document, please, and it's the minute from the first Gold Group meeting at 11:30, and it's PS 06491. Now, that's a Gold Group meeting which you attended, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct.
And I wonder if you could look at item number 5 under the heading Family Concerns. And item 5 reads, circumstances discussed regarding Colette Bell contacting police and being informed that male believed to be her partner, Sheku Bayo, was deceased but subject to formal identification. She provided details of NOK, next of kin, his sister, who she did not have contact with her. The final sentence is decision to be made re FLO deployment by MIIT officers. Do you remember that discussion?
Not specifically, but that would make sense, what I'm reading there.
And MIT or MIIT, is that the Major Investigation Team?
Yes.
And that's part of Police Scotland?
Yes.
So at the first Gold Group meeting, the briefing appears to have been around Police Scotland providing family liaison officers.
Well, what the phraseology says there is decision to be made, so the decision hasn't been made at that point, I would probably suggest.
But there's specification that it's MIT officers that's under consideration, would you agree?
Yes, under consideration, yes.
Do you remember that now?
I don't remember the specific discussion, genuinely.
During your evidence, you explained the structure of those involved in the investigation. And I think you told us that Detective Chief Superintendent Boal was part of the investigation team along with Detective Superintendent Campbell. I
think probably my explanation was around the lines that Detective Chief Superintendent Boal was there to support the SIO, Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell, yes.
So in relation to the area of investigation?
Yes.
All Now, Detective Chief Superintendent Boal has not yet given evidence, but she has provided a statement to the inquiry. And I wonder if you could look, please, at a paragraph in her inquiry statement. It's SBPI 00223, and it's paragraph 307.
Paragraph 307.
Paragraph 307, yes. Now, if you look, paragraph 307 reads, my understanding was that PIRC FLOs weren't available and they weren't being deployed immediately. Therefore, my understanding was Police Scotland would deploy family liaison officers and PIRC family liaison officers would take over from them. I think from my statement I wasn't sure when that was going to be. Nothing made me think there was going to be PIRC family liaison officers attending that day, but I knew we needed somebody who was well trained in the role of a family liaison officer. Would you agree that on the face of that information, Detective Chief Superintendent Boal appeared to be aware during the day that the family liaison officers would be provided by Police Scotland?
Yes.
During 3rd May, did you become aware that there was an issue in relation to the officers from Police Scotland who had been identified to perform the role of family liaison officer?
No.
Well, do you remember being informed that officers who had been identified to perform the role weren't in fact on duty?
The honest truth, I don't recall that, but that's not unusual, so that wouldn't surprise me.
If what I've suggested to you is correct, would that sort of issue be the fault of Police Scotland or PIRC?
I wouldn't say it's the fault of anybody, it's just the reality of the circumstances, and that if there's not a flow on duty, there's not a flow on duty, but the priority would then be to get a flow on duty.
Sorry, perhaps you misunderstood me. What I'm suggesting to you is that certain flows had been identified as being on duty, and it was then later discovered that the information was wrong and they weren't on duty.
Yeah, so that, I don't know the rationale behind that, but yes, that would be a flaw in the system, or I'm not sure how, but...
And would that flaw in the system be the fault of Police Scotland or PIRC?
It would be the Police Scotland system, I'm assuming. I don't know enough of the detail, but I'm assuming that would be correct.
On 3rd May, you attended the subsequent Gold Group meeting at 2:30, that's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
And at that stage, investigators from PIRC were present at the meeting.
That's correct.
And was deployment of family liaison officers discussed at that meeting?
I think so, from having read the minutes over the last couple of days, certainly.
I wonder if we could look at the minutes of the second Gold Group meeting. It's PS 07268. And if you look to the front page of the document, it's clear that you were present at the meeting.
Absolutely.
And if you would move down the list of those present, Keith Harrower from PIRC is listed as being present, and I think John Ferguson was also from PIRC. I wonder if we could look to the second page at bullet point or heading number 3, investigative process. And if we could look to the 9th bullet point at issue 3. You'll see that the 9th bullet point is next of kin strategy. And it reads, partner of deceased made aware and statement noted. No formal ID has taken place, but ID has been done by a Facebook image initially. Next of kin identified as sister and a family liaison officer being identified, brackets 2 times Police Scotland FLOs have been identified, 1 times DI as flow to brief and coordinate. The issue of family liaison officers was obviously discussed at the second Goal Group meeting. And would you agree that at that meeting it was confirmed that 2 Police Scotland family liaison officers had been identified?
Yes.
Do you now recollect that at that stage the names of the officers were used who had been identified?
Sorry, no.
And at that bullet point, a DI was to brief and coordinate. That would be a detective inspector.
Yes.
Again, an officer from Police Scotland.
Yep.
If you look to bullet point 10, does it read family liaison officer to be briefed in relation to equality and diversity? Next of kin has been informed by DC Parker and DC Mitchell.
That's correct.
And is that something that you remember?
Not specifically, but again, that would not be of surprise to me.
But that would be important in the circumstances of this case, that the family liaison officers were briefed in relation to equality and diversity. Is that right?
They were to be briefed, yes.
Yes. So you would agree, or would you agree, that by that stage there doesn't appear to be any ambiguity about what was happening in relation to family liaison officers?
No, from reading that, whatever time that was, again, 2 have been identified, and those that have been identified are to be briefed.
Were you aware on 3rd May that family liaison officers ultimately attended at the station?
No.
During your evidence generally, you indicated that you were raising issues surrounding family liaison officers. I wonder if you could help the chair. If you were raising issues surrounding family liaison officers, surely you would have been told that officers from Police Scotland had been identified and that the issue was in hand?
My issue was that if you fast forward a couple of hours, at 5 p.m. that day, the next of kin to Sheku Bayou had no family liaison officers deployed to them. That was my concern.
I appreciate that may well have been your concern, but if you were raising that concern at the time within Kirkcaldy Police Office, presumably you would recall being informed by those who were involved in the investigation that family liaison officers had been identified and that issue was being dealt with.
I certainly know that family liaison officers had been identified, but it was still a moving feast at that point. You know, they had not been deployed, so...
But during your evidence, you told the chair that during the course of the day you were informed that PIRC family liaison officers would not be available till the following day and that the family would be seen the following day. But the information contained in the minutes of the meeting would appear to suggest that, in fact, they were to be seen by family liaison officers from Police Scotland that day.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. That was the intention at that point. My point over the last couple of days was that the PIRC flows were not to be deployed that day.
But surely the important point would be whether the family were to be seen by family liaison officers, not whether they were seen by family liaison officers from PIRC or Police Scotland.
I absolutely agree with that. The problem was that what happened post this meeting was officers from Fife Division had went and visited the family with the death messages number 2 and 3, and there was a significant fallout from that and an absolute mistrust and distrust around policing because Sheku had died following police contact. So at that point, for me, the opportunity to deploy a Police Scotland flow would have added little benefit because of that distrust that had emerged over the sort of preceding 4 or 5 hours.
I wonder if I could ask you about that issue then and the chronology of it. Officers from Police Scotland visited the family on 2 occasions on 3rd May, that's right, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And after the second meeting, did you speak to Detective Constables Mitchell and Parker?
Very briefly.
And when you spoke to them, after speaking to them, you visited the family?
That's correct.
And you gave evidence regarding your reasons for going to visit the family, but did you go and see the family because the family of Mr. Boal demanded to see you?
There was 2 reasons as per that's in my statement, albeit it never came out in the last couple of days, but as per my statement there were 2 reasons that I went there. Number 1 was that the family had asked for a senior officer and or Gary McEwan to attend within 24 hours was the feedback to me. And secondly, and most importantly, the reason I went is that 8 or 9 hours on since the death of Sheku, nobody had been in a position to give the family some of the important detail that they deserved to hear before they heard it elsewhere on social media or wherever else.
I wonder if we could look at that passage of your operational statement, which is PS 03136. And it's page 2 of 5. And it's the 5th paragraph on that page. At the 5th paragraph, does it read, about 16:45 hours, DS Dursley informed Chief Inspector Shepherd that 2 detective officers had attended at the home of the deceased family and were met with a highly charged, emotional and at times confrontational environment. I thereafter spoke to both officers, DCs Mitchell and Parker, and informed that the family demanded my attendance to get answers. And was that why you attended?
Sorry, I thought I'd explained that. There was 2 reasons that I attended. One was that the family had asked, but that was within a 24-hour period. But the second and most important was that by that time, 8 hours on since Sheku's death, no one had been in a position to give the family some of the important information that I felt they deserved to hear at that point.
But by that time on 3rd May, were family liaison officers in fact at Kirkcaldy Police Station?
I'm not sure about that.
But if you attended because family liaison officers had not attended, would you not have tried to find that out before going? As I mentioned earlier, the police, for me, the distrust that had emerged because of the scenario that had played out that afternoon, the requirement or the benefit of Police Scotland flow attending, I think would probably have escalated matters. The reality was there was no flow there. The family were absolutely devastated and upset, and what I felt as a senior officer, as the most senior officer in Fife Division, that family deserved to hear the facts that as I knew them at that time. Had the flows been in position and been with the family, and again I think I mentioned this earlier in the last couple of days, I would not have attended that day. I would have probably left it 2 or 3 days and then went as a mark of respect as a senior officer. But the reality was there were no flows deployed, and that family deserved to be given some form of explanation, and I took it upon myself to do that. And sorry, finally, is that was ran by the ACC, the Gold Commander. PIRC were aware of my intention to go up. That was not just me going in isolation. So you went to see the family on the evening of 3rd May.
Yes.
And on Tuesday, senior counsel to the inquiry showed you passages of evidence from members of Ch Supt family, Caddy and Daddy Johnson. And you were shown passages of evidence containing their accounts of what you told them at the meeting on the evening of 3rd May. And I think it was suggested that the accounts provided by the family of what was said were very similar to the description of events which was given at the second goal group meeting.
I think there were certainly some elements of that, yes.
And when that was being put to you, did you agree that the accounts provided by the family were similar to the information which was noted in the manuscript version of the second goal group meeting?
Certain elements, I think, yes.
And given the similarity between the content of the handwritten minute of the second goal group meeting and the accounts given by the family, do you think that you did provide that information to the family?
What information specifically?
The information, for example, in relation to Mr. Boal having kicked the female officer.
I genuinely don't recall saying that.
It would be a coincidence if that was the information that was in the goal group minute and the family claimed to have been given that information later in the day. That would be a coincidence, wouldn't it?
I don't know if it'd be a coincidence or not, but I genuinely don't remember saying it. If I had said it, I would have said I'd said it.
All right. Looking back, is it possible that your visit to the family added to their concern that Police Scotland had provided them with changing and contradictory information?
I think the information that I gave to the family that evening was certainly far more, not specific, far more in depth than the information that had been given up till that point. So they were absolutely shocked at the information that I provided, because that was not what I think they believed had happened up until that point.
So, in terms of my question, is it possible that your visit to the family added to their concern that Police Scotland had provided them with changing and contradictory information?
No, I think I was honest with the family, and I think part of leadership in any organisation is being honest with the people that you speak to. So whether that was not well received by the family or not is a point for the chair to determine. But the important thing is, as a leader in the organisation, you have to be honest with a family that have just lost an next of kin, and that's what I tried to do.
Please don't think I'm criticising you. I'm just trying to ascertain whether you think it's possible that your meeting exacerbated feelings of distrust and hostility towards Police Scotland, despite your intentions.
Actually, no, I don't think it added to the distrust, actually, because when I left that house, they were thanking me for being there or having attended the family. So I think it actually helped to regain an element of trust.
When you left the family, did you return to Kirkcaldy Police Station?
Yes.
What did you do when you returned to Kirkcaldy Police Station?
We not far after that went into the Gold meeting.
Before going into the Gold meeting, or when you were at Kirkcaldy, whether before or after, did you meet with the family liaison officers who had been identified?
I genuinely don't remember that, if I did.
Do you remember meeting with an officer named Kevin Houliston?
I don't, sorry.
The inquiry has not yet heard from Kevin Houliston, but he has given a statement to the inquiry, and it's SBPI 00354. And I wonder if I could ask you to look at paragraph 120. So this is Officer Houliston. What I do actually specifically remember is being told at that stage to stop And I think that relates to a briefing in relation to family liaison officers to stop because Chief Superintendent was out visiting the family, which, would you agree that would suggest that the family liaison officers were in the station when you were visiting the family?
Certainly that family liaison officer, yes.
Well, it says we, which sounds plural. We were told to wait at that particular time. So again, we waited for how long I could not even guess at. But I have a specific memory of being at a meeting. I was up there in the room when a conversation took place where Chief Superintendent McEwan had returned from visiting Mr. Boal's family. He explained that the family were distressed, angry, upset, specifically with the police. And if you look to the next paragraph, I can't recall if they specifically requested that they did not want further police officers going to their address, or if that was the recommendation that it would be unwise for police officers to attend at that address. At that stage, after some discussion, the decision was made at that stage that we would not be deployed as family liaison officers. So that ended my involvement then. Do you now remember having a meeting with the family liaison officers?
I genuinely don't, and I'm sure they'll be given evidence. I'm not clear from that if I did actually meet them or if he was privy to a conversation I had. But either way, I'm absolutely content with what he's saying there. I think that's absolutely fair. When I came back, I did explain to whoever was present that the family were distressed, angry, upset, specifically with the police at that time. So I did say that, yes.
But would you agree that that the information contained in the minutes and in the statement confirmed that by the evening of, or the early evening of 3rd May 2015, there were in Kirkcaldy Police Office family liaison officers who were briefed and ready to go?
Sorry, go and repeat that.
Family liaison officers were there, they were briefed or being briefed, and they were ready to go and see the family.
You would have to ask. I don't know enough of the detail around that to say yes or no, to be honest.
And you don't remember it?
Remember what?
Well, the issue of the family and family liaison officers was very important to you.
Absolutely.
And during your evidence, the suggestion appeared to be that family liaison officers would not be available until the following day, the 4th. But the information contained in these documents suggests that on the 3rd, family liaison officers were within Kirkcaldy Police Station and were available to see the family.
So what I said, I think in previous evidence was that Park family liaison officers were not available until the 4th.
But there was never any question during the 3rd that Park family liaison officers were going to be available.
Well, you have to ask Park about that. My point was that to deploy 8 hours later, or probably more by that time, we're probably approaching 12 hours later, family liaison had not been deployed. The family were distressed, angry, upset, as is documented there. The benefit of at that point deploying Police Scotland family liaison officers would have added probably to that distrust.
I wonder if we could look at a passage from your evidence on Tuesday, which is at page 109 of the transcript, beginning at line 22. No.
Sorry.
Oh, but I'll read it to you. At page 109, line 22, you said, "I think that was probably moving on a little bit around once the death messages, etc., had been presented. I mean, it was clear to me, and it was clear, I think, to everybody at that point, that to then introduce Police Scotland family liaison officers into that family dynamic was not going to add any value because of the distrust that had come because of me and my team's the policing."
Yes.
And does that part of your evidence sum up why Police Scotland family liaison officers were not deployed in the evening?
I think that's what I've been trying to explain, absolutely.
But
Due to the delay, due to the poor cause of death, or not cause of death, sorry, but the death messages, that is absolutely exacerbated, if that's the right phrase, the situation.
And finally, therefore, from the material that you've been shown this morning, would you now agree that at no point on 3rd May 2015 was there an expectation on the part of senior police officers at Kirkcaldy Police Station that PIRC, family liaison officers, would be deployed that day?
I think my understanding or expectation is that PIRC, whether the intention was or was not for them to deploy, they did not have the capacity to do so.
But there was no expectation at any stage during that day that they would be deployed.
I suppose the bottom line is that the instruction was that from PIRC was that Police Scotland would deploy flows.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go back to your seat, please. And Ms Mitchell, if you come forward to the table. Mr McEwan, you'll be asked questions by Ms Mitchell, KC, who represents the families of Ch Supt Garry.
Great, thank you,
Ms
sir.
Mitchell.
Thank you, Lord.
Aye.
We heard evidence yesterday that when you spoke to your colleague on the phone and found out there had been a death in police custody, the first thing that came to mind when you heard hesitation in his voice or something in his voice was, what's the ethnicity of this person? And you became aware that it was a black man that had died in police custody. You then went on later to explain your important concerns about how the community would react to this. And you said that what you wanted to do was to try your hardest to ensure that disorder and looting and criminality did not occur in the community. And what I would like to ask you is, had a white man died in police custody, would you have been concerned about criminality? Would you have been concerned about looting and disorder? And if not, why not?
I would absolutely have been concerned. I've actually, I was at that point in the police for 25 years. I was actually specifically involved in a set of circumstances where a white man died in police custody and there was severe disorder. Police vehicles were set on fire and I was a young officer involved in that. So, yeah, absolutely, that would have been a concern of mine also.
So you gave evidence yesterday at 4322, where you said where black men had died following police contact, and the community impact on that around, in Manchester and London, and I had the safety of the wider Scottish population to think about as well. So I wanted to try my hardest to ensure that disorder and looting and other things that came in other areas didn't happen in Kirkcaldy, Fife or across Scotland. You're saying that your clarification where black men had died, that's not necessarily the case. You would have had the same concerns if it was a white man.
Well, the situation we were dealing with, as in this inquiry, is a black man that died following police contact, so I was trying to make reference to similarities, but your question was, if it was a white man, I've had experience of a white man dying in police custody and there being rioting and severe disorder. So both elements, it really depends on how the community responds.
And when you said, I had not been involved but had exposure to other events down south in particular and debriefs of them, were you referring to white men or black men?
Black men. Or a black man, actually. So it was the Mark Dugan case I was referring to. I think I maybe referenced that at the time.
Yesterday.
Yes.
Moving on, following on my learned friend's questions on exacerbation of the distrust to the police force, distrust of the family in relation to the police force, I want to ask you about a specific issue in relation to the post-mortem. Now, you attended at the family home, and in evidence, you gave evidence yesterday about knowing that the head of the family, Mrs. Boal, was coming up from somewhere down south.
Yes.
Do you recall the family saying to you that they wanted to wait until she had come up before they identified Sheikha Bio's body and before the post-mortem?
No, I don't specifically remember that. It was more general than that. Bearing in mind that was quite a a frantic discussion. It was more before any further activity took place, the family were wanting the mum to travel up. So it was a bit more general than that.
When you went there, to the family home, was there discussion about the identification of the body of Sheikha Bayo?
There was certainly discussion in general terms about the post-mortem, because they were asking, you know, when would that likely be, etc. And I'd explained, well, look, it's a PERC investigation. The PERC will talk you through the chronology around that. The identification specifically, I can't say yes, but it would be feasible that they would ask that question. That's one of the questions I would ask if I was in a similar situation, I would imagine.
Would it be feasible that you would have asked questions of them about coming to identify the body?
No, because that was not my role there. That's more a flow role, to be honest with you. But no, there was discussion around post-mortems, but I was very general myself because I didn't have oversight or involvement in that. So it was a general discussion.
Now, you say that was a flow role, but you were there, as it were, in place of the flow. Is that not correct?
No, I was there as the commander of Fife Division to try and bear some accurate facts to the family around what had happened around the death of Sheku.
But you considered at that time, at least, you were better placed to go and speak to them in place of flow.
There was no flows available at that time, so that's why I went. But not as a flow. I'm not a trained flow, so that's not why I was there.
Pat Campbell gave evidence to this inquiry on day 49 about the gold meeting post you having gone to see the family, so the meeting in the evening. And he was asked a question by my learned friend counsel to the inquiry. From your memory of that meeting, what was the impression that you had about the family's perception or attitude towards the post-mortem and about formal identification taking place with their involvement? He said, so my understanding from that forum that I can recall was that there was still resistance from the family about attending to identify Mr. Bayo prior to the post-mortem actually taking place the following day. And he was questioned, and when you see resistance, can you help us understand what and he responds, yeah. And then continues question, impression was of the level of that resistance. And the answer is, it really came from Garry McEwan, to be honest with you. And it was really about the fact that they had made it clear that they would not attend for the post-mortem examination for the identification aspect. And a question is asked, we've heard evidence that they wished to give time for the deceased's mother to arrive from London before they would formally identify Mr. Bayo prior to the post-mortem. Do you have any recollection of that being expressed at this gold meeting? No, as I say, the whole aspect of the post-mortem identification, liaison with the family, passed straight over to PERC in respect of any involvement. I had no involvement at all after this forum. So his recollection is that you've responded that there was resistance from the family about attending to identify Mr. Bayo prior to the post-mortem actually taking place the following day, and that they had made it clear that they would not attend for the post-mortem examination for the identification aspect. Now, does that trigger any memory in your mind about conversations that were had?
No, I definitely did not have a discussion with the family around whether they should or should not go to a post-mortem.
It's not about whether or not they should or should not go to a post-mortem. It was about whether or not, first of all, in relation to identification, they would identify the body of Sheikha Bayo prior to the post-mortem.
Again, I don't recall going into a discussion with the family around, I don't recall saying to the family, you will have to identify the body before a post-mortem, because that, I know that that's the procedure, but that was not the level of detail of the conversation with the family. They were, there was 20 odd people in that house with multiple questions. That was not the level of discussion that we had. There was a general discussion around post-mortem, and I deferred that to say that's a PIRC responsibility, and when you meet with them, they will explain the chronology.
And there, despite that, as you say, being the procedure, you say you didn't speak to them about that.
No, we didn't get into that level of detailed discussion.
So it would be another coincidence if they had understood that to be the case.
I have no idea. I know that they met later with other members of staff, so I did not have that discussion with them.
Well, we're talking about Pat Campbell's memory of the meeting
Right.
that you were at.
Yeah, so I never had that discussion with the family in that level of detail.
So Pat Campbell's recollection that you had, that you came back from that meeting, and that you said that Gary McEwan said that they had a level of resistance, and that they had made it clear they would not attend for the post-mortem examination for the identification aspect. That's just wrong.
He's definitely mistaken. I never said that.
And if the family had spoken to you that they wished to wait until the head of the family, Mrs. Boal, came up the next morning before identifying the body and before the post-mortem was carried out, they're also wrong about that.
No, I think that would be a feasible question to ask. I just don't recall that conversation with me and the family. That's what I would expect.
Well, do you see where the issue lies there? We've got the family saying that they said, we don't want to talk about post-mortem and we don't want to talk about identifying the body until our mother comes up the next morning, the head of the family. We want to wait till that time. And then we have evidence in a meeting later about one of your colleagues saying that you had discussed the fact that that you had discussed in that meeting that there was resistance to this very thing, and it came from yourself. And you're simply saying that those two things are coincident rather than you perhaps not remembering that you did in fact have a conversation about them.
So I fear I'm repeating myself now, but I did have a conversation with the family. They raised the post-mortem, and I explained to them that that was not why I was here, and that the chronology, the timeline around identification and post-mortem would come later. That was not why I was there. I didn't have the detail. I didn't know when these things would be happening in the coming days and hours. So.
And what appeared to have happened after that time is that it was considered, at least by Pat Campbell, that the family were resistant to identifying the body of Sheikha Bayou and involvement in the post-mortem, but not for the reason that the family say they gave. Can you see in those circumstances, again, as my learned friend said before, why it might be thought that your involvement at that meeting with the family did cause further exacerbation of the relationship between Police Scotland and the family?
I don't actually, no.
We're in a very short adjournment for administrative reasons at this point. Now, Mr. Hamilton, do you have any application under Rule 9.2? Yes, sir. You come to the table, please. Mr. Hamilton, should I ask the witness to withdraw while you make the application?
Yes.
Yes. Would you withdraw to the witness room, please, Mr. McEwan? Yes, Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, sir. Yes, there are two matters really arising from the evidence that we've just heard. The first relates to the proper interpretation of the Gold Group minutes at 1440. It was put to the witness that flows had been identified, but the suggestion left hanging that flows may in fact have been present. And I want to explore with the witness whether those minutes, as he understands it, are properly understood as being, if you like, prospective. It's for actions to come. And I would be relying on the evidence of Mr. Houliston, which is a statement before the inquiry.
Yes.
And the second matter arises from the line of questioning, which is that Mr. McEwan, in attending or answering the call from the family, becoming aware of that at 4:45, whether his presence was reasonable or otherwise. And in relation to that, I simply wanted to pick up on, again, amongst other things, the statement of Mr. Houliston, who is asked to give an opinion on this matter as an expert FLO. Mr. Houliston's statement was referred to by my learned friend, but not in this regard.
So in terms of documents that you may refer to, Houliston's statement is in the system.
I checked this morning, sir, and both of the documents that I require are available.
Thank you. Very well, I shall allow you to ask these questions. The witness back, please. Mr. McEwan, your own counsel, Mr. Hamilton KC, has some questions for you. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you. Mr. McEwan, I want to ask you about two matters. The first is in relation to the Gold Group meetings of 1440, which were put to you earlier on, and we might have them back on the screen. So that's PSO 7268, and you were taken down to the bullet point in relation to NOK strategy, next of kin strategy. And you'll remember that what was put to you in the second part of that, next of kin identified as sister and an FLO being identified. 2 times Police Scotland FLOs have presumably been identified, one DI as FLO to brief and coordinate. And what was suggested at one stage was that perhaps FLOs were present in the building at that point. And what I want to ask you about is whether your understanding of those minutes is that there were or were not FLOs available at that time.
Most certainly not. They were not available at that time, is my understanding.
All right. Okay. Perhaps then I can turn to the second matter, which is what was put to you in relation to the meeting, your attendance at the family home, which arose from a phone conversation that you had at 4:45 with, who was that with?
DS Dursley.
Yes. And am I right in saying that the evidence you've given today is that the reason that you wanted to attend the home is because you were asked for by name? and also because, I think you said this morning, you wanted to go?
Yeah, there's two elements to it. One is that the family had, a member of the family seemed to know me and asked that I attend. I think the phrase was within 24 hours. But secondly, and more importantly to me, is that this family had been sitting for 8 hours by then and had not been given any coherent explanation as to what or how, in the most basic sense, Sheku had died following police contact.
And when you then considered whether or not to attend, did you check with PERC in relation to whether flows were available at that time?
Yes.
And were you told that there were no flows?
Yes.
Had you been told that flows were available, would you have attended the house?
No.
And the reason you wouldn't have done that is
that's the role and the responsibility of flow. That they're trained and they're experienced in undertaking the role of a flow. I am not a flow.
And to double check that, I think your evidence this morning was that you also spoke to a superior officer, is that right?
Yes.
And that was?
ACC Nicholson.
And the purpose in speaking to him was precisely what?
To say that I intended to go up to the house to provide the family with an explanation as to the circumstances, as I understood it at that time, that led to Sheku dying following police contact.
And Assistant Chief Constable Nicholson's response
was yes.
He was fully supportive.
He was fully supportive. Yes.
And had he instructed you not to do so, presumably you would not have attended.
Absolutely not.
All right. I wonder if we could look at SBPI 00354, and I want to put this to you in the context of fullness. You haven't had this statement put to you before. No. Today, and if we could go to paragraph 126 first and then 128. You may remember that you were taken to various paragraphs which I think were designed to show perhaps some unease on the part of Mr. Houliston, who is the family liaison officer. For completeness, I want to take you to paragraph 126. Given that I can recall Gary McEwan visiting the family, I've been asked my thoughts on Gary McEwan visiting the family from a family liaison perspective. I think I'm fairly sure that I can recall being told that he'd been asked for specifically by the family. I do not know about previous contact or knowledge or whether they knew each other or not. I would assume that there would have been, given the fact that I think they have asked for him by name, I think. It is unusual. It is certainly unusual, but in the circumstances that were presented at that time, understandable, I think, as to why that happened. And if we go forward to 128, I have been asked if a fair summary of my response to the question regarding Gary McEwan would be that, from my perspective, whilst it was unusual for someone of Gary McEwan's position to go out to the family before FLOs had been deployed, the circumstances dictated that that actually might be quite reasonable to do. Yes, absolutely. Do you agree with that statement?
I absolutely agree with that statement.
Thank you.
Mr. McEwan, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. I'm grateful to you for taking the time to do that over the past days. I think what we'll do now is take the morning break slightly early, so we'll adjourn for 20 minutes and then you'll be free to go.
Great, thank you, sir.
Good morning, Miss Boal. I'm sorry you've been kept waiting, but the evidence from yesterday ran over. Would you say the words of the affirmation after me, please? I solemnly, sincerely and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Thank you. Good morning, Stills.
morning.
Just. You are Lesley Boal.
I am
And what age are you?
57.
And you retired, as I understand it, in June 2020,
I did.
just after lockdown.
Yes.
And at that stage, your rank was Detective Chief Superintendent.
Yes.
And you'd been in that role since July 2014,
I had.
as I understand it.
That's correct.
And so in May 2015, when the events we're involved in here, that was your rank at that date.
That's correct.
Now, you will see in front of you a blue folder. And I just want to take a minute to explain to you what's in there, because this is for your use at any time. There are a number of, please open it, and there are a number of documents in there. And you should have a couple of statements. We'll go through those in a moment. And when I'm referring to paragraphs and statements or documents, they will also come up on the screen in front of you. Now, some people prefer to have a hard copy and aren't comfortable reading off the screen. So the hard copy is there for your use if that's what you prefer. If not, I'll put paragraphs and things up on the screen.
Thank you.
But if I'm asking you a question about a particular document or a particular paragraph, and you think, oh, there's something I'd like to refer to in a different area, you just need to tell me, and I can make sure that comes up on the screen as well.
Okay, thank you.
And if you need any time to find it, we do have breaks, and over lunch we can do that, we can come back to things, or you can ask me for a few minutes just to find what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
And so please take your time today. Let's start with the first document that I think is in that folder. Now, as we go through documents, I'll give the doc identification number. That's really for the benefit of the lawyers who are sitting behind me. And it's PS 00669. And you will see that that's come up on the screen in front of you, and you've got the hard copy. And this says witness statement, and it's got your name on it, Lesley Boal, and the area, the police station where you prepared this police statement. And if we move up, you'll see it starts, I am a Detective Chief Superintendent with Police Scotland and have completed 28 years police service. So this is your statement, do you remember?
Yes.
Great. I think in your inquiry statement, which I'll come on to in a moment, you indicated you don't remember exactly when you prepared this statement.
I don't.
And I couldn't find a date on it, but you've said in your inquiry statement at paragraph 57 that you were sent a request from PERC quite some time after, and in months. So
Yes.
was this some months after the 3rd of May 2015 that you prepared it?
My recollection was many months.
When you say many months, can you help the chair understand what you mean by that? It doesn't
I
have
can't
to be an
recall,
exact number.
But about 6 months?
Right. And that was in response to a request from PERC.
Yes.
We've heard evidence they were leading the investigation
That's
by
correct.
that stage, certainly. So they sent a request and you prepared a statement, and the statement we see here is the one that you prepared.
That's correct.
You didn't prepare one at the time.
I didn't.
And I think in your inquiry statement, you explain that, maybe let's go to the inquiry statement for a moment. Paragraph 58. I'll come back to this. But just so you've got the paragraph on the screen, you say, you were talking there about Perk. It was unusual to prepare a statement for an on-call incident. There was nothing I had done that was part of the evidence chain. I would provide a statement if I had been involved in the evidence chain in some way, such as if I had taken a statement, attended at a scene, witnessed anything, or taken a production, or if I had recorded a person's status as a suspect or accused, interviewed a suspected person, arrested a person, charged a person, took samples, physical data, or intimate samples from a person, etc. So those examples of things that would be done in this evidence chain that you use. You didn't do any of that, so it wouldn't be normal to do a statement after the 3rd of May 2015.
No, and having been on call in that role for a number of years before and a number of years after, I haven't prepared a statement either before or after. This is the only incident I've prepared a statement.
So it's not normal practice?
No.
You're not in a similar position to constables or detectives who are involved in an investigation?
No.
Okay. We've heard that when people are on call, it can be a very busy role and there's a lot happening. Is that a fair reflection of?
Yes.
And as a result of that, when you're on call, you're brought into things, suddenly brought in to be involved, but may not have a long commitment to the investigation as such. You have awareness of a whole range of issues that might be happening, but it is usually for a specific period of time out of hours, and then the next day, normal business, whichever area is responsible for it would take over. So, for example, if I was on call and there was a homicide overnight, I would be aware of the homicide at 8 o'clock in the morning. When the Detective Chief Superintendent for Major Crime came on, I would then update him or her, and they would then take responsibility, that being their area of responsibility. Does that make sense? So you would hand it over to that person who's going
Yes.
to be responsible long term for it?
Yes.
And we've heard other evidence about how often people were on call. How often were you on call as Detective Chief Superintendent?
Every 5 weeks, but there could be because of annual leave or sickness or whatever. It might be a bit more than every 5 weeks, but generally there was 5 Detective Chief Superintendents in Police Scotland, and we had a week each on the rota.
Right, I'll come back to that, but we were talking about the blue folder.
Yes.
And let's go back to your original statement, which was an operational statement prepared at the request of PERC, prepared within a number of months, perhaps 6 after these events. And when you prepared this statement, was it prepared by you at request, or was it, were you given questions from PERC, or were you just asked to prepare an operational statement?
Just prepare an operational statement.
And so this was your recollection of your involvement
Yes.
in these events at
Yes.
that time?
Yes.
Not prompted by PERC?
No.
Right. And when you wrote that statement, were you doing your best to be accurate and to tell the truth and give as much detail as you could?
Yes.
Thank you. You've mentioned this in your inquiry statement, and we've heard evidence from a number of officers that often the operational statements they prepare are closest to the events, and there's a feeling amongst the officers that perhaps they were the better. If there's a conflict or a dispute or any disagreement between what you say now, today, and what you said then, that might be, the chair should perhaps prefer the operational statement. And I think you comment on this in your inquiry statement. Is that the way you feel about this statement?
Yes.
It's just to help the chair that if he's looking at perhaps a distinction between the two, he should prefer the operational statement version.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we now turn to your inquiry statement just briefly again? And you'll see this will come up on the screen. Now, that was taken by a member of the inquiry team on the 23rd of September and the 4th of November last year.
That's correct.
And it's 75 pages long. You've signed it on every page. And can we look at the final page, please? And usually we have the signature redacted on the screen, but you may have an unredacted version in your
Yes.
blue folder. That's it. And we can see there in the last page, your signature there is redacted, and it was signed on the 6th of January 2023.
That's correct.
And the final paragraph is 353, and it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And you realised that that was the position when you signed all the pages.
Yes.
So it may be that this will be published on the inquiry website after you've given evidence.
Yes. Can I just say that there, having read it over again, there are some inaccuracies in it?
Yes, and I want to go through those with you right now. We'll get this out,
Okay.
we'll get, so that you can make it very clear to the chair what you're happy with and what you're not. Now, I've been told that there's an issue in relation to paragraph 26 of your inquiry statement. And if we can go to that. Now, this relates to a paragraph headed training. Is that the correct one?
Sorry. Yes.
And it's about the training you had as a senior investigating officer,
Yes.
which is probably the most relevant to the duties of the CID at that point, which would have been the investigation of the death. You're not trained in post-incident management. And you say there was training available for that. Now, I know there's an issue about the way this paragraph appears, about the training for post-incident management. Would you like to explain to the chair exactly what the position is?
So when I was giving my statement, my recollection, because it'd been quite a number of years previously, was that I was meant to attend post-incident management training for firearms incidents. However, subsequent to giving my statement, I have found an email which I had sent to my own personal email address because it had joining instructions for this course and what we had to take with us and a map of where we were going. But it was clear on the joining instructions that it wasn't a post-incident management course. It was a pilot course for investigators and how they would interact with post-incident managers. So it was that training as to bridge the gap between SIOs and PIMs. It was a pilot course. It had never been run before. It was being run by the National Police Improvement Agency, MPIA. And it was a course that had been developed by the Metropolitan Police. And they were going to pilot this course for other areas. And depending on our feedback, they may review it and then roll it out. So part of that, or the joining instructions, we had pre-read material, and we also had to complete an exercise, probably just a knowledge check that we had read the material and understood it. So the course was to start on the Monday. Keith Hardy and I had been selected from Lothian and Borders Police as SIOs to go on the course. And my recollection, all the arrangements were in place in terms of how we were going to get there. My recollection was either the late Friday night or even the Saturday morning we got a phone call to say the course had been cancelled. So we didn't actually go. But in terms of the pre-read material and the exercise, I had completed it.
This is, I'm interested in this. You say it was run by the MPI agency, MPIA.
Yes, National Policing Improvement Agency.
And what date, do you remember the year that you were attending or due to attend this training?
So, I should have looked at the email. I think it was 2011.
Do you still have that email?
I do.
Would it be possible?
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. You anticipate my question. It'd be helpful to see, and you say this was a pilot course?
Yes.
How many people were going to attend that course?
I don't know, but on the original email, there's a list of people who it was sent out to.
Right.
It's, from recollection, it's not a large list. It was people who were going to attend the course. So you'll have some sort of idea of what the course size might have been.
And you say that 2 were picked from Lothian and Borders?
Yes.
I mean, this is pre-Police Scotland.
Yes.
It would be legacy forces at
Yes.
that time. Were there others from other regions or areas, divisions?
To my recollection, not in Scotland. I think there was maybe Greater Manchester Police, or there was other forces in England and Wales.
We've heard evidence previously in the inquiry from a Conrad Trickett, who we understand was appointed post-incident manager on the 3rd of May 2015. And he gave evidence about Pat Campbell hadn't been PIM trained, Conrad Trickett had been, and he talked about speaking a different language. I'm interested in you saying this course was designed to bridge that gap. Had you had any training at that stage about post-incident management?
No.
By May 2015, had you had any training?
No.
Had you experienced, either before 2015 or after, dealing with post-incident managers and maybe finding you were speaking a different language or that there were issues about communication?
No, I had no experience after this incident where post-incident managers were deployed.
All right. Did you have any experience prior to 2015?
No.
Thank you. Now, as well as that paragraph, I think there was maybe just a typo in paragraph 197 that you wanted to draw to the Chair's attention. If we can look at 197.
Yes.
And let's just get that on the screen. And this relates to a later point in the day. We will come through, we'll go through things in chronological order. But it relates to a forensic strategy meeting at 4:45. This is on the 3rd of May 2015. And then you say, I can't recall if that's right, if PERC were there in that meeting, then I wasn't there. I wasn't aware about Stuart Houston being crime scene coordinator. And I understand you wish to change that.
Yes, I was aware.
You were aware. So
Yes.
it shouldn't say wasn't aware, it should say was aware. All right, thank you very much. Were you otherwise, apart from those 2 paragraphs, were there any other issues that you wanted to raise? No. Thank you. Now, you have also, I think, a hard copy in there, and I won't bring this up on the screen. We've been provided with scope records from Police Scotland for individual officers, and do you have your scope records there?
Yes.
Right. I won't be asking any particular questions about that, but is the copy in your folder an accurate copy of your scope records?
Yes.
And for the lawyers in the room, that's PS 18518, but I won't bring that up at this stage. Now, you've also requested a copy of your daybook.
Yes.
To make that available. We've heard other evidence about day books and the use that people would put them to and how important they were to people's recollection. Is that the reason that you wanted a copy of your day book?
Yes.
Tell us about your practice with the day book.
I always kept comprehensive notes in my day book.
Right. Now, we've been advised that despite extensive searches, for retired officers such as yourself, it's not been possible to trace those day books. But I understand that you may feel that might put you at a slight disadvantage in relation to giving help to the chair in the inquiry. Is that fair to say?
It may.
If you feel you're at a disadvantage or you may have had an answer in your day book, I'm sure that maybe one day they'll turn up. Could you point that out to us so that the chair's aware of that if you feel that there would have been evidence available? Right. When you prepared your operational statement,
yes,
6 months after, would you have had access to your day book at that stage?
Yes.
And would you have used the entries in the day book to refresh your memory?
Yes.
When you right. Thank you.
But saying that, probably, well, I would have had more comprehensive notes in my day book as opposed to preparing an operational statement.
I see that. So we've taken evidence from some officers who remain in service, and their day books have a lot of notes and writing, which it's not a mirror reflection of
yes,
what they have in their statements. So we'll bear that in mind also.
Thank you.
Right. Are there any other documents that you would have liked to have that we've not been able to provide you with?
I can't think at this moment.
If anything springs to mind,
Yes.
just let us know.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to begin by looking at your experience. Can we go back to your inquiry statement? And first of all, I think we don't need to go to this paragraph, but at paragraph 209, you said you never worked in Fife Division. Is
No.
that correct? So that you've mentioned Lothian and Borders. Is that where you were largely
Yes.
based? And then if we look at paragraph 26.
Yes.
Now, we looked at this a moment ago. You said you were a trained SIO.
Yes.
And can I ask, how long, as well as being trained, had you experience of investigations in the role of SIO?
Yes.
And how many years did you act as an SIO?
Can I look at my training record just to...
Please do. As I say, anything in the blue folder you should feel free to look at.
So, the training record states I was trained in 1996 as an SIO.
Does that accord with your recollection?
No, it doesn't actually.
What's your recollection?
So, 1996, sorry. So I would have had to be promoted to inspector rank to attend the SIO course and have been in the CID. So when I was promoted to inspector, I had a year in uniform before going into the CID. My recollection would have been round about 2002. And
that you were promoted?
I think I was promoted to uniform inspector 2002. So I would say maybe 2003 I would have attended the SIO's course. And then from then, as a DI, as a Detective Inspector, you would be appointed SIO. I was a Detective Chief Inspector, not in division, but in what is now known as counter-corruption. And in addition to an SIO, I was trained as a counter-corruption senior investigating officer. And then I've undertaken SIO duties on a number of occasions, mainly as Detective Inspector, but thereafter.
Can you help the Chair understand how many years you were appointed as Senior Investigating Officer to investigations?
Probably the majority of time would have been as a Detective Inspector operationally, so that would have been maybe 2 years as a Detective Inspector, and then in counter-corruption another 2 years, and then depending, I think as a Detective Superintendent you don't normally take on SIO duties, but you may in certain circumstances.
And did you, in certain circumstances, take on those duties once you'd reached that rank?
On one occasion as a Detective Chief Superintendent I did.
Thank you. Can you help us understand how many investigations you've been involved in where you were SIO? That might be a difficult question.
I don't know.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 14 of your inquiry statement? Maybe we could just look at the further up slightly. Right, and we see here this is a paragraph headed up experience in cases in which race was a factor. And I'll read out paragraph 14. Race was a factor in one case I investigated. It was a complaint against 2 South Asian officers by a male of the same ethnicity. The allegation was related to cultural practices. I would say I needed a level of cultural awareness to investigate that. We had the assistance of an advisor, an expert. We would describe the situation to the advisor, and we would plan a strategy. They would consider whether any of our proposed actions would inflame a situation or cause distress or alarm. It was more about cultural appreciation and understanding. Yes. I'm interested in the work you were doing with the advisor. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, so there were certain parts of the investigation that were very sensitive, and we were going to have to speak to community what's the best way to describe it? Individuals who were community leaders, or
we've heard about individuals called lay advisors.
No, this was individuals that were going to have to speak to as part of the investigation.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
So it was an imam that we were going to have to speak to, and it was going to be very sensitive. The issue was what was the best way to do it. I had an idea. However, I wasn't sure it was the best plan. So the the advisor and I had a meeting just to talk around how we could, or what was the best way to approach this very sensitive subject, and how to approach and obtain a statement from the individual.
And was that of assistance to you in your strategy, that meeting with the advisor?
Greatly, because my original plan, which I had thought about quite carefully, actually having spoken to the advisor, that was completely changed.
And can you tell me roughly when was this investigation?
So it would have been 2006, perhaps.
And can you explain to us how it was that an advisor was brought into the investigation to assist you? Was it at your request, or
Yes.
was it?
Yes.
And was that a facility that was open to you at any stage if you felt it was necessary?
Absolutely.
And had there been awareness raising or training that allowed you to understand how you could perhaps benefit from the assistance of an advisor?
Not specific training. I suppose we had, there was cultural awareness thread through probably all training or most training, but it was very high level. But there was clear awareness within Lothian Borders Police that there were advisors available if they were required for a whole range of subjects, not just ethnicity or faith or belief. If you required their assistance, then they were there for you. And it was really helpful.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 12 of your inquiry statement? This is headed up Background in Professional Standards, or relates to, perhaps we can look up
Yes.
a little, unless that's, keep going. Or maybe it's my heading I've given in my questions. Let's go back to paragraph 12. I want to ask you about your background in professional standards, certainly. In 2006, I was appointed Detective Chief Inspector in charge of Lothian and Borders Counter-Corruption Unit. Is that what you were talking about a moment ago?
Yes, that's what it's now called.
Right.
It was previously called Professional Standards, and what is now called Professional Standards used to be called Complaints and Conduct.
Right. I better get this noted down, because we've heard evidence from people about the Professional Standards Department.
Yes.
When you've referred here to saying something was previously called Professional Standards, is that a different department?
So what was previously, in Lothian and Borders Police, what was previously called Professional Standards is now called Counter-Corruption.
Right.
What was previously called Complaints and Conduct is now called Professional Standards. So they're two different units.
Right.
One name has swapped and one's been given a new name.
I'm going to have to write that down to remember it. Okay. So you were in any event, the current name is Lothian and Borders Counter-Corruption Unit.
Yes.
And does that relate to complaints about the conduct of police officers? Or is it more than that?
No, it's specifically what could be described as corrupt practices. So it has to be criminal, it's not misconduct, and it's not all criminal conduct. It's corrupt or potentially alleged corrupt practices.
Right. Can you help the chair by giving an example of the sort of corruption that you're talking about?
I've given a couple in my statement because they're probably in the public domain, so that would be easy. But so, for example, a serving police officer being involved in the supply of controlled drugs and being linked to organised crime. It could be officers and police staff providing police information to others, including the media, sensitive information, personal information. On another occasion, it was a police officer involved in potential sexual crime and data protection breaches.
Right. And you were in that unit for how long?
I think about
Couple of years?
A couple of years, yeah.
I wonder if I can ask you about, so I understand that is the unit's role. Can I ask you about matters involving the Police Service of Scotland Conduct Regulations 2014? So that's the regulations we're interested in relation to this. but generally in relation to misconduct, complaints and conduct regulations. From what you've said, would that always be an aspect of the unit's work? If someone is involved in corrupt practices, then would there always be some sort of potential misconduct aspect as well as the potential criminal conduct?
Yes. However, in terms of counter-corruption, we dealt with the alleged criminality and what is now professional standards. Once we had finished our investigation, they would then look at the conduct or misconduct aspect of it. So in counter-corruption, we didn't deal with the misconduct.
So did you, you didn't deal with that at all?
No.
You dealt with the potential criminal
Yes.
allegations. The other department,
Yes.
would they always wait until you had finished considering criminal allegations?
In my experience, yes.
And was that a policy or an arrangement between the two departments that they would always hold off until you'd completed your investigation into the corruption?
From recollection, the misconduct side of it would be held or put on hold until any decision that Crown Office Procurator Fiscal would wish to make.
So your investigation is into possible criminal
Yes.
allegations. Would you prepare a report for the fiscal at some point that
Yes.
would be considered? And the fiscal would then have the responsibility of deciding if there's to be any criminal charges levelled against the officer. And so once that decision had been made, then the other department, now called Professional Standards, could take the possible misconduct proceedings forward separately within that department.
Yes. In terms of a misconduct investigation, yes.
Yes. Now, can you help me understand what would happen if you've carried out an investigation into possible corruption, the Crown have said we're not going to prosecute? It would be at that stage that the matter would be handed over to the other department?
The other department would be aware of it already. I suppose the decision is ultimately rests with the Deputy Chief Constable, who would have been aware of both the criminal aspect of it and the conduct or potential conduct aspect of it. I think there is, I think there is the ability to continue with misconduct when there's a criminal investigation ongoing. But from recollection, I think, well, my experience was it was always, professional standards were always aware of it, already aware of it, but in actual fact the proceedings didn't start until after a criminal investigation was completed or there was a decision from Procurator Fiscal.
And what would happen if the Crown reserve the right to prosecute? So they don't say we are prosecuting or we're not prosecuting, but they say we're reserving the right to think about this in the future. What would happen in relation to the other department?
I can't say for certain. I don't think I've been in that situation, but I would believe that the misconduct or the conduct investigation could still progress. I'm not certain, but just thinking about the matter, I think it would.
So perhaps you can help me with this. It wouldn't be the situation, as far as you're aware in your experience, that it would simply defer misconduct proceedings indefinitely for all time coming until the Crown maybe review matters.
I can't think of a case that I've experienced, so I'm just thinking logically that actually if there is misconduct, there would be no reason. I can't think of a reason why that couldn't continue if a case was just being held in abeyance by Crown Office.
Right. Thank you. Have you come across any situations in the experience you had with the counter-corruption unit where there have been proceedings running in parallel?
No.
Could we look at paragraph 351 of your inquiry statement, please? Thank you. You say here, I sat on a disciplinary hearing as a superintendent.
Yes.
So this was before you were appointed as chief superintendent,
Yes.
where the allegation against the officer was for conduct which involved racial communications. I remember it was totally inappropriate, verbal and electronic communications. If I remember correctly, the outcome of the hearing was the officer was dismissed from Lothian and Borders. Over the years, I would have been aware of others, but I can't give specific examples. Now, can you tell us about your experience of sitting on disciplinary hearings? How did you become involved in that as superintendent?
So this was going back to the previous conduct regulations. So I know there's the 2014, 2013. This was the one before 1996, I think they might be.
All right.
So in those occasions, the process has changed now. So in those occasions, there were the decision was, or the hearing was Chief Superintendent as the chair, supported by two assessors who were of superintendent rank. So the chair and the two assessors would hear all the evidence, and there was discussion between the chair and the assessors as to outcomes. So on this occasion, the decision, if I remember correctly, was that the officer was discharged from duty or dismissed from duty. And if I think it's this case, my recollection is that the officer appealed, and from the old regulations, the appeal went to the Chief Constable initially, and by the time it went to the appeal, the Chief Super, who had been the chair of the hearing, had retired, and I then was able to evidence to the Chief Constable why we took the decision and the rationale for taking the decision to dismiss the officer, if that's the right case.
And did you remain a superintendent at that time?
I was a superintendent at that time.
And in terms of when this took place, can you help us understand sort of which year it was, or roughly?
I think it'd probably be about 2010, 2011.
Now, you said that over the years I would have been aware of others, but I can't give specific examples. Is that because of a lack of memory, or because perhaps they were confidential as part of your role involved in these types of hearings?
I'm not specifically sure in terms of whether this was in relation to the type of cases that we were dealing with, or I was sitting as chair, but within Police Scotland as a Chief Superintendent under the new regulations, I was the chair for misconduct hearings on a few occasions, 3 or 4 occasions. The vast majority was in relation to misconduct relating to inappropriate sexual conduct.
Any in relation to race?
No.
So your work with these hearings, initially as a superintendent rank,
Yes.
supporting a chief superintendent.
Yes.
And then when you were promoted yourself to chief superintendent, you would be taking the role of the chair.
Yes.
And in terms of your awareness of specific examples regarding racial allegations of some sort of discriminatory behaviour,
Yes.
do you remember if you personally dealt with others or just had an awareness of them?
Yes, just an awareness.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 104, please? And again, I'm just trying to understand professional standards and their role at this stage.
Yes.
Now, you've said here, Craig Blackhall, we've heard his name mentioned
Yes.
by other witnesses, was superintendent in professional standards based in Aberdeen. Now, just to be clear, this was in May 2015.
Yes.
And you, by this stage, you were chief superintendent.
Yes.
So he's a rank below you.
Yes.
And he's in professional standards. Is that the new professional standards, if I can call it that?
Yes.
And you say he's based in Aberdeen. Are professional standards based in Aberdeen, or is that just individual superintendents?
That's where Craig Blackhall is based. Their professional standards all over Scotland.
Right. So he was a superintendent, and you've said in terms of advice and investigation of police officers, Craig was senior in the role. He's very knowledgeable and approachable. I don't know the extent of his involvement in this investigation.
That's correct.
But you were aware of him, was that from your previous work with professional standards, if I can call it that?
I dealt with Craig on a number of occasions when I was Detective Chief Superintendent Public Protection, when my investigation teams were carrying out allegations of criminal conduct by police officers. So in my, and I would call it gold meeting, so whilst not declared a critical incident, I used the gold structure all the time in terms of investigations that my national investigative teams were carrying out, because it's a good structure to have. And when we were carrying out those investigations, I was gold, the detective superintendent of the area of business. So if it was a report of a police officer had committed a rape, I would be gold. The detective superintendent, rape and sexual crime, would be silver, and then underneath that would be the bronzes, and Craig or a member of his staff would attend the meeting as bronze professional standards.
Bronze professional standards.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your use of the gold structure.
Mm.
So you said, this is, for example, an allegation an officer has carried out a rape. Was this related to your counter-corruption work?
No,
at
this
the time?
this was when I was
Chief
Chief Superintendent for Police Scotland for Public Protection.
Right.
And just to give some context, part of my responsibilities were I had a number of national investigation teams. So I had the National Rape Task Force. So each local division has their own rape investigation team, but sitting above that is the National Rape Task Force, which normally takes on rape investigations where they're either complex, they cross divisional boundaries, they may involve a person of public prominence, or on occasions we would investigate police officers to take away from the divisions to have that level of independence, or as far as possible independence. So I would use the gold structure because it's a good structure to use in terms of everybody being there. So Craig or somebody from professional standards would come as bronze professional standards so that they would be aware of what was happening on the criminal investigation and be aware of what potential conduct could come out of that investigation.
Right. And how many bronze commanders would you have at these?
So each investigation or incident is unique. So you could have a number. You would, for doing investigations like this, you would have bronze investigation, so that would be the SIO. You would have bronze professional standards for the conduct side. You would have a bronze from the division that the officer was based in, and that would be around the officer himself, his welfare, but also sort of community impact in policing, because there might be issues in the station or the division that that officer was working in, depending on what was the alleged criminality. You would have bronze media. But it depends what the situation is and what you would want.
So you would tailor your selection of
Yes.
bronze commanders to the particular
Incident, yes.
circumstance.
And on occasions, you could invite people in who weren't part of that hierarchical structure of bronze, silver and gold. And I can give an example if you want.
Yes, please do.
So our response to the revelations in child abuse in football was significant. And as part of that, we invited in external representatives. So we had a external representative from SFA, from the Professional Footballers Association, and I'd spoken with Gold and said that we needed somebody from the children's side of things. So a CEO of a children's advocacy and support children's rights group was brought in terms of giving Gold advice and assistance in terms of maybe media messages, or to try and get some community impact from children as to how this investigation could interact or could affect them, maybe children and families.
Thank you. And you've talked about having professional standards as a bronze commander.
Yes.
What were the benefits of having professional standards brought into the Gold Group?
It wasn't so much as in terms of the investigation itself. It was more an awareness for professional standards, and knowing that there was, the two procedures, albeit they weren't running in parallel at that time, but there was an awareness of what was happening with the individual. And there might have been other conduct issues that might have fallen out of the criminal investigation. So there might have been conduct issues in relation to other officers not involved in the criminal investigation, but had been highlighted through the criminal investigation.
So professional standards could be made aware by their presence of what's happening, but also could contribute to the
Yes.
Gold
Yes.
Group. Thank you. And Superintendent Blackhall took on that role a number of times, did you say?
Yes.
As bronze commander for professional standards. and
Bronze
different-
professional standards, yes.
And was that in relation to situations where officers were accused of criminal offending?
Yes.
Right. And so was that something you did as a matter of course when you were chief superintendent? If you were
Yes.
involving an investigation in using the Gold structure?
If it was an investigation that one of my teams were undertaking, I was Gold. If it was in relation to a police officer, then there would be a bronze professional standards. They may not attend every single meeting, but they were definitely on the structure.
Thank you. And from your own experience, using that structure and using professional standards as a bronze commander, did you see any benefits of that, including them into that structure? And if so, could you give us an example?
So not specifically benefits to the investigation or to me as Gold. I think it was more, I think you probably have to ask Craig Blackhall and or professional standards what the benefits were in terms of considering maybe other misconduct or when conduct proceedings started in relation to the officer.
I think we are intending, or maybe have spoken to Craig Blackhall and hope to find out more about this. We've heard evidence that some contact had been made with Craig Blackhall in relation to this incident. Did you
Yes.
have any involvement with Craig Blackhall
No, I didn't.
as part of... No. As in relation to your involvement with the Gold Group structure in relation to this incident,
Yes.
do you remember having discussions about involving professional standards or Craig Blackhall in particular?
No. That's not to say it didn't happen. I just can't remember.
You weren't part of that.
I don't recall that.
Thank you. Were you ever asked for advice, having had experience of corruption, professional standards? Were you ever asked to give any input or advice in relation to that?
No, because I couldn't in terms of conduct or misconduct, because it's something that I wasn't part of my role in terms of either the investigation side. As
So
I
it
said,
wasn't part of your role
no.
in relation to this incident?
No.
Let's turn to your involvement that day. We know you were Detective Chief Superintendent. I think your responsibilities on call that day included Kirkcaldy. And can we look at your inquiry statement, paragraph 85, please? And I think you see, you appointed the SIO, so it was your task to appoint. We've heard it was Pat Campbell you appointed.
Yes.
And the policy on deaths at that time was if there was an unexplained death, then the on-call DSU would attend. So that's a detective superintendent.
Yes.
I think the policy was eventually changed because it was unworkable. It was without question that Pat Campbell would be attending Fife after the death. In the circumstances, there was no alternative other than for him to take the role of SIO. I'm interested in this paragraph. So you appoint Pat Campbell as SIO. I think we've heard that he was on call that day. He was the on-call detective superintendent.
Yes.
And you say that at that stage, it was without question that he would be attending Fife after Mr. Boal died. And as I understand it, that was part of his role as on-call detective superintendent.
Yes.
You say that the policy was eventually changed because it was unworkable. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think it was. I think it was the fact that the expectation for the detective superintendent to attend every unexplained death on call. And whilst that sounds okay in the central belt of Scotland, there was difficulties, the expectation that the detective superintendent for, say, the north of the country could attend every unexplained death. For example, if they were based in Dundee, and the expectation that they would attend Fort William or Highland or somewhere else in the Highlands and Islands on every occasion that there was an unexplained death, where there was already an SIO there. So there would have been a detective inspector or above, so it could be a detective inspector or a detective chief inspector who was on call in the local division. They would absolutely attend because they would be SIO, but the expectation that the detective super would have to go there as well and provide that support out of hours on every occasion there was an unexplained death. I think I believe it was just seen as to be unworkable. That's not to say probably detective superintendents will go out, but I think they must go out. I think that was relaxed a bit.
Right. Did that policy or any other policy require you, as Detective Chief Super, to attend an unexplained death?
No. I could maybe go into a bit more about my appointment of Pat Campbell.
Please do,
Because
yes.
it's probably not.
That's literally the
sorry.
next section I was going to ask you about. So please do. I'm very interested. We've heard some evidence that there was a call and you appointed him.
I suppose just in terms of my appointment, I wouldn't normally appoint the SIO
Right.
because if there was, for example, a homicide, the on-call, if it was out of hours, the on-call detective inspector or detective chief inspector would automatically become SIO, initial SIO for the homicide, and the detective superintendent would support, either remotely or by attendance. So, having been informed of this circumstance, the issue was, could a detective inspector from Fife be appointed the SIO, which was no, that's not happening.
And for people who are listening,
Mhm.
can you explain why you're saying no?
Well, the grave nature of our initial information that a male was gravely ill, unresponsive following police contact and restraint. So a detective inspector from the local area would be completely inappropriate. Another reason was the grave nature of it. I wanted an SIO of sufficient rank, and a detective superintendent is not normally appointed SIO. It's out the ordinary. But in these circumstances, I believed it needed a detective superintendent as SIO. I wanted a detective superintendent who had had no footprint on Fife Division, and I knew Pat Campbell hadn't. He was a legacy Strathclyde officer who had, the year before, taken over my previous job as detective superintendent, Lothians and Scottish Borders. So there was no history with Fife Division. And he would be attending anyway to a certain extent. So that was the decision to appoint him SIO.
And how was it this incident was brought to your attention?
My recollection is a phone call from the Chief Superintendent of Fife Division, Garry McEwan, phoned me.
And what steps did you take at that stage? So you've heard of the incident from Garry McEwan. You've taken the decision to appoint a senior rank, Pat Campbell, as the SIO. What steps did you take at that stage in relation to your involvement?
So I think I asked Pat Campbell to get in contact with the division to see if we can get some further information. And at that point, we were shortly going into the executive meeting in the morning. So at that point, Pat was appointed, and it was waiting to hear back from Pat what the situation was.
Now, we've heard evidence that the events took place after 7:20 in the morning,
Yes.
that Mr. Boal was taken by ambulance to Victoria Hospital, and then shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning, life was pronounced extinct.
Yes.
and Gary McEwan declared a critical incident at 09:10 hours in the morning, shortly after he was informed that Mr. Boal had died. Now, you've talked about appointing the SIO because at that stage it was a grave situation. When you appointed Pat Campbell, was Mr. Boal still alive at that stage?
Yes.
Was he in the hospital in a grave situation?
Yes.
And when did you find out that he'd passed away?
From recollection, I think it was just before. I'm not 100% sure. It was the 9:30 executive meeting.
We've heard there was a 9:30
Yeah.
teleconference meeting. So it wasn't particular to these events that it was a meeting that was held,
Yes.
and the ACC Nicholson would host that.
If I can refer to my statement, my
Please
initial
do,
statement.
yes.
I put at 9:30, same day I took part in the routine executive conference.
Sorry, can I pause you there? Which statement are you looking at?
So it's my statement to,
Is it the inquiry?
no,
Is it the operational?
operational statement, page 2.
We'll just get that back up on the screen so that we can see where we are. Now, I think we have 4 pages of this statement. Which page are you on?
Page 2,
Page 2. And which paragraph, or roughly where in the page can we find what you're reading from?
paragraph
the
4.
9:30?
Yes.
Paragraph 4. So that's paragraph 4 starts at 9:30, same date. That's on our screen.
Yes. Took part in the routine executive conference which reviews significant events over the preceding 24 hours and plans for known events taking place in the succeeding 24 hours. During this time I was informed that the Mail, now that's wrong, I think that should be who I now know to be
Right.
Mr.
You
Boal.
didn't know who it was
No.
at this
No.
moment in time.
had died at 9:10. So I don't have a recollection of being informed before, but I was definitely informed at 9:30.
And you see there, Chief Superintendent McEwan had declared a critical incident. I was informed that Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service was instructing the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, PERC, to take over and lead the investigation. And I was informed there would be a gold meeting at Kirkcaldy at 11:30 and agreed to attend.
Yes.
So it was before the 9:30 meeting that you found out that Mr. Boal had died. The Mail had died.
I think it was during the 9:30 meeting.
Sorry. And was it during the meeting that you were told that PERC were going to be leading the investigation?
Yes.
Can you give me a moment, please? I'm
Yes.
conscious of the time.
Yes,
be-
but that's a
would
convenient
that be a
point to stop for
convenient
lunch.
time? Thank you.
Well, we said at 2 o'clock.